Good afternoon and welcome to this week's 2-minute warning feature interview. Today we're going to be discussing about the food industry, more specifically about food security, improving food security, and how to make the global food supply chains more sustainable. These are two topics that have come into have grown attention over the last months due to recent events regarding the increase in food prices and sustainability, which is an issue that different industries are aiming to become more sustainable, and we're all trying to get to the net zero and have be more environmentally friendly. So for today's interview, we have Eli Scaf, co-founder and CEO of Right Farm. Welcome, Eli. And to kick off with the interview, I'd like to start asking you about your opening remarks about these two topics. Where are we standing today in terms of food security, sustainability in the global food supply chains?
Sure. No, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time. Look, it's an interesting time to be working in the space. You know, if you take a look at two things we're focusing on, right, which is agriculture and supply chains. Agriculture is a very old and traditional industry, and then supply chains are inherently messy and inefficient, right? And when you plug those two together, then you have a host of challenges and problems that you can address and solve, right? And given what we've seen with the pandemic and the recent war in Ukraine, you know, all of these things impact that food supply chain, and we need to secure that, right? And we're at a point where there's a lot of government and private sector focus in the space, trying to solve for agriculture via agtech, trying to solve for food supply chains with food tech. And so it's a great place and a great time to be working on Right Farm.
Great, good to hear these opening thoughts. I'd like to start asking you then, where is Right Farms located in reducing where is Right Farms located in reducing the food supply, the emissions, the global emissions of global supply chains, of making supply chains more sustainable?
Sure. So our business model is pretty simple. We source fresh produce from the source, so be it a local, regional, or global farm, and we distribute to food service businesses, right? And our role ultimately is to ensure that our customers receive the products they expect consistently and reliably with no interruption really to their core business. Now, given this business model that Right Farm is working under, we have a lot of touch points that happen across the value chain, from harvesting at the farm and us picking up the produce all the way to inventory, storing, and then last mile delivery to our customers. And at every touch point, there's a lot of value to be added and a lot of benefits that can be created on sustainability, right? So look, it all boils down to the data, and this is something that's been missing in the agriculture space and in farming, right? If you can grasp that data, use it not only internally, but also with your demand and supply side, and specifically with the farms, and them understanding how big a market size is for a round tomato or a beef tomato or a mango, and them being able to optimize on their end, whether it's what to grow, at what quantity, you know, at what unit economics are they profitable. All that, giving back that data to the farms contributes a lot, not only to the efficiency of the supply chain, but also to food waste. A lot of food waste happens now at the source, obviously throughout the chain, and even at the end of the chain, right? And those are things that we're tackling, right? Via data and via a few projects and partnerships that we work on, not only for us, not only for reducing our wastage, but also for reducing our suppliers' wastage and our buyers' wastage.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you can actually control the production of different crops, from tomatoes to lettuce, whatsoever. And it's really interesting because there's here in the case of the GCC, where we're here located, they actually account for 85% of the totally consumed food is imported from other parts of the world. And also in this particular region, also the food waste is particularly the amount of food waste is particularly high. I want to go back to the point on data you mentioned, and ask specifically, what sort of data are you using to come up with these productions, and in which ways do you use it?
Sure. Ignacio, maybe just to touch on a few numbers as well, given that you had mentioned. So 85% is imported when it comes to food, but fresh produce, it's at 90%, right? So there's an even bigger challenge there. And I think the number is we, as an individual end consumer in the region, we waste around 250 kilos or a quarter of a ton of food a year, which is ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Your question that you have?
So I was asking about the sort of data that you're working with, and in which ways you're leveraging it to achieve a more circular economy on.
Absolutely.
The sector.
So look, a lot of our efforts and a lot of the tech team's efforts as well are placed on our forecasting engine, right? Understanding our customer segments and needs at an SKU level, forecasting their demand based on historical data, based on projections, and then you can drill as deep as you want, right? We go very granular on segmentation, whether be it the size of the restaurant, the type of cuisine, the type of menu they have, and so we try to get our forecast as optimal as possible and as accurate as possible. And relay that back to our farm partners, right? And that's ultimately the biggest key to this: getting your forecast right, predicting accurately, and then using that data on both supply and demand side.
Yeah, certainly. We can see nowadays that data is being used everywhere. It's become this sort of buzzword and somehow like some panacea to different problems, I can say. I would like to ask, what about other different types of emerging technologies that we can find in this case in the food industry spectrum, either from blockchain, artificial intelligence, or any other type of embedded systems?
Sure. So look, we do a lot of machine learning on our tech for a lot of the core stuff that add value. So pricing is one of them, and forecasting is another. Mm-hmm. And again, if you look at the agriculture space, and this is where it becomes interesting, we've seen recently a lot of government investment in sort of enabling farms via tech, be it smart irrigation systems, crop monitoring systems, or even completely changing the landscape of a farm from soil-based to vertical or to organic, etc. So there's a lot of work to be done. Public sector jumped on it quickly, obviously, because there's a national agenda for it. But also, it's now nice to see that private sector interest and investment in the space is happening. Right. Recently, you had Red Sea Farms in Saudi close a funding round. So it's nice to see that there's private sort of interest there. And just taking back maybe to sustainability again, the more data-driven your approach is to this business, to whether it's to farming or to the supply chain of food, the less food waste, the less food miles that food takes, and so to get to that plate. So essentially, it starts off with data to prevent food waste, and then you're not going to prevent it 100%, but then you go into things like recycling and upcycling of that food waste.
Yeah. And Eli, I wanted to jump in here and kind of shift your attention towards the role of governments, and maybe how do you shift the linear food economy that we have today and shift it towards a circular one. And I'm glad you mentioned policies. Could you touch upon that point a bit? Maybe the UAE. So the food security is a top priority for the UAE. So what's your thoughts on that? How can policies be improved? Do you think enough has been done already in this space? And yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so the food security strategy in the UAE is one of them. UAE's net zero strategy is another. And then you have the global UN Sustainable Development Goals and the like. I think from a policy perspective, there are a few things that can be worked on, right? Really focusing on agriculture, incentivizing people to work in the space, and incentivizing farmers, subsidizing farmers, be it with the inputs required for farming, whether it's water, electricity, raw materials, etc. So that's one thing that we can touch on. Another one that we spoke about is empowering these farms with data and insight. To give you an example, if you speak to a farm now in Al Ain, right, and you tell them, why are you growing tomato or cucumber, or what's the market size for a specific type of tomato for the HoReCa sector, right? They have no idea, that leads to other issues, right? Inefficiencies in the farming process, wastage, where you're trying to yield as much as possible so you can quickly turn over that stock, etc. So another one would be empowering these farmers with data, right? A third one, I think, which is very important, is the import prices of fruits and vegetables versus the local prices, right? And this starts at the government level. I don't think anyone can sort of really be involved in that process. So yeah, I think those would be the high level things. And then obviously you have the likes of Silal here, who are investing in farms, enabling farms via technology.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned empowering farmers and kind of this idea of shifting the culture. I think of education when I think of this point. In general, I mean, you mentioned a crazy number, 250 kilograms of food waste per person in the Middle East. That's crazy. So how do you think that industries, small businesses, startups can kind of have a say and help that cultural shift even at the individual level? Because I feel like that's such an important aspect to it when it comes to food waste. The human is at the middle of all of that. So how do you kind of shift that culture, support that idea, and shift towards the circular food economy?
Thank you for mentioning that, actually. So you're absolutely spot on, and that's the way we see it, right? The end consumer essentially dictates what everyone before them in the value chain does, right? So it absolutely starts with awareness and education, right? Bringing these topics to light, informing people that, hey, we waste a lot of food here in UAE or in the region, and sort of building that or shifting that mindset towards being more sustainable, starting with the end user, right? And it's going to trickle down all the way to the farm. It will get there, right? So yeah, I think, look, even when it comes to businesses, right? What we see with chefs, for example, just a quick example, two examples, actually, nice stories. One, a lot of our chefs don't understand the sourcing side when it comes to fruits and vegetables, right? Chefs are artists; they create dishes, delicious, some not, but they don't really care or are not involved in the sourcing process. However, they do have a mindset bias towards what they're used to. And so we a lot of times face conversations with chefs where they say, hey, I'm used to this lemon from South Africa because it's perfect for my use case. I've been using it for years, right? But then he or she have no idea whether that same lemon with the same specification for that same use case exists in Egypt or even locally, right? And then even if we do mention that, there's resistance. No, I'm used to the South African one, right? So
the habits of the people, whether it's the producers or the consumers,
And it's understandable, because any interruption, and this is why we've experienced the success we've had since launching. It's understandable because any interruption to that lemon, right, is gonna trickle down to a big problem operationally for that restaurant, right? If I don't get my lemons the way they're supposed to for my use case, I'm not gonna be able to offer that dish for that day, right? So it's understandable, and again, we try to educate and say, look, this exists elsewhere, this exists locally, and this contributes again to reducing food miles, etc. So yeah, it's absolutely a mindset shift. And it's nice to see now that there's a lot of end users that we're hearing from, either from farms or from restaurant owners and brands that are requesting that they know where these fruits and vegetables are being sourced, right?
Yeah.
And then add to that things like traceability, etc. So I think there's a long way forward, a lot to do, but we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, yeah, amazing. And you spoke about funding a bit. We touched upon that point a bit, but funding new technologies, funding kind of the new food circular economy. You obviously at Right Farm recently raised, is it around $2.8 million? So which is amazing. And kind of what are the tips and tricks that you feel could be shared? Because I mean, there are so many new startups. I feel like we're in a new generation where people want to go into this industry, and food and beverage, the F&B industry is huge and there's so much potential. How do we get that financing? Because sometimes there's a gap, unfortunately. So how do you get it? What are different tips and tricks that you would kind of touch upon?
Yeah, sure. So I think three things mainly. One is finding a real problem in a market, and a decently sized market or opportunity, and tackling that problem head on, right? So in our case, what we did was we wanted to do something around the agri space, right? And we looked at the demand side, and we saw there were three very major challenges that existed when it comes to food service businesses or HoReCa, whether you're a mom and pop restaurant or a massive cloud kitchen, right? And those challenges were the same across the board. Those are, we have very specific product specs that we need consistently and reliably. We need an optimized delivery SLA, and we need access to financing for our working capital. Three major pain points across the segment. And that's what we started tackling, right? And then that's how Right Farm's business model was born. Second thing, so finding that problem and addressing it head on, given that it's a big market opportunity. Second is timing. So luckily for us, with everything that's going on around food security and around supply chains, we were lucky enough to launch in the UAE, in the region, during this time. And then third is the team, right? If you have a solid team that you can start this venture off with, and make sure that everyone is aligned to your mission and vision, with those three things, I don't think you should have problem in fundraising.
Yeah, amazing. And to touch upon the ideas of partnerships and creating this kind of innovative environment, you mentioned partnerships earlier. What kind of partnerships do you see are lacking and that need to be increased to achieve things like the SDG Zero Hunger? I believe it's SDG number 2. So what kind of partnerships do you see need a significant increase?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when we're talking about sustainability, it's not a one person show, right? Yeah. You need to partner up with everyone from the supply side, from the demand side, people who are or companies that are synergistic to what you're trying to do on the sustainability side. So definitely not a one person effort. And I think more government and private sector sort of investments and partnerships in the space of agtech and food tech is super critical. And then partnerships like we do with impact-driven startups that are tackling food waste, that are recycling or upcycling, doing something with something we launched on the prevention side, which is imperfect produce. And we have a lot of partners who either supply us with that on the farming side, and then we have a lot of demand side partners who for their use case, imperfect produce works, right? Imperfect produce is just a weird looking carrot, but it's a totally nutritious, totally edible carrot, right? Now I understand if your use case is for a salad, then that carrot might not be useful for you. But if you're a smoothie place, then that carrot is totally fine, right?
course, of course. And what's next for you in terms of Right Farm? What do you see? Where do you see the kind of circular economy and food going towards? Do you see a positive outcome? I mean, hopefully, but what do you think are next steps in the upcoming months?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do right now via these partnerships that I mentioned is really solidifying our sort of role on the sustainability side, both internally and with our demand and supply side, right? So making sure that whoever is interested, and a lot of our demand customers are, right? I went to a meeting yesterday with a big portfolio restaurant chain. They're interested. Hotels are super interested in that space. So really making sure that we address the whole food wastage issue, not only internally, but with our network as well. And sort of focus on the regenerative approach to food waste, right? So doing things like recycling, turning food wastage, not only ours, but our farming network and our buying network, to compost, which then you give back to farms, right? Talking about the circular economy, and even upcycling, so transforming food waste into byproducts that are useful in many cases within farms, right? Especially with the livestock farms. So I think, you know, a lot of work to be done there. We're always on the lookout and implementing these processes both internally and with our network.
Okay, amazing. And we're going to start to wrap up. And I wanted to bring up a point, Elia, and get your thoughts on that ahead of COP27, sorry, and COP28. I mean, obviously, these are huge events and climate meetings that are coming up really quick. And for us, particularly in this region and in the Middle East, it's going to be a very interesting time. Everyone's talking about it. The first one's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in November, the second one in our home in the UAE. So I wanted to get your thoughts. If you had to put top priorities, what would you like to see come out of these COP meetings, main kind of takeaways that you would really want to see come out of them in terms of whether it's the food industry, but also broader sustainable goals, I guess?
Sure. I think a major one should be how we're going to transform agriculture, right, and empower farmers. That's super critical. I think there's been a lot of neglect previously, and so, you know, you even see this now, right? The sons or daughters of farmers are not farmers and are not interested in farming, right? And that shouldn't be the case. So you know, a clear path towards a solution for agriculture, towards empowering farmers, towards enabling them, whether it's via tech or data. That is one. And then two, obviously, and the topic as well that we touched on when it comes to food wastage, right? And again, it starts with education and awareness. It starts with shifting a mindset. And look, there are so many things we can do, right? Very simply, we don't have a minimum order quantity for our demand side buyers, which is pretty much unheard of when it comes to HoReCa, right? But what happens is we realize that if we put an MOQ, it might optimize our unit economics more, but that buyer, that restaurant, is only doing that because there is an MOQ and they don't want to pay for delivery, but they end up wasting those fruits and vegetables because, you know, they don't have that demand to cover it, right? So there's a lot of work to be done. But to answer your question, yes, a focus on agriculture with a clear plan to empower and enable these farmers, and then also shifting in mindset via awareness and education on food wastage.
Amazing. And I wanted to touch upon a small point before we wrap up. This idea at COP27 and COP28 that's going to be kind of this, the importance of developed versus also developing countries, this the importance of recognizing that in certain parts of the world, there's going to need more support, more help in terms of financing. Do you have any thoughts on that? Are there takeaways that we can learn from maybe certain parts of the world where the food circular economy is already more advanced? Maybe a case study or an example that you can think of ahead of COP27, COP28?
Sorry, I didn't really get the question, if you don't mind.
Yes, sure. I mean, I was thinking this aspect at COP27 where there's this importance of recognizing that in certain parts of the world, there's going to need more support in terms of transitioning, whether it's in the food circular economy, whether it's in general, the energy transition, which is kind of at the top of everyone's mind right now. Is there ways to help support, mitigate the losses, the damages, etc.?
I think it goes back into really focusing on the agri space, both for internal consumption as well as for export, right? There's a lot of work that can be done, whether it's on sourcing of seeds and implementing sustainable sort of practices when it comes to farming. That sounds great, but effectively what that does is also allow you to adhere to international regulations and standards when it comes to seed use and fruits and vegetable production, and that can help you export more, right? Because one thing is to not utilize these practices and then sell locally in your market, which you can, and a lot of African countries do that. But it also enables you to open up that channel for exporting as well. So I think that's one. And also with supply chains, a lot of countries suffer. We don't suffer from that here. I mean, our roads are great. We don't have any challenges with logistics really. But in a lot of these countries, the infrastructure doesn't even allow for a better sort of distribution of food. So I would say those two areas would be crucial.
Amazing. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up for this interview. It was great having you. So thank you so much, Eli, for joining us in this feature interview. And it's going to be super interesting to see what Right Farm comes up with all these technology, this data, and really transforming the food value chain in the UAE and hopefully abroad. Thank you to Ignacy, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this week's 2-minute warning interview. You can follow Eli on his social medias to kind of know where everything is going with Right Farm, and obviously follow us at Gulf Intelligence for future interviews. So thank you, everyone.